Such reviews have consistently shown that the CPI is statistically and conceptually coherent. Ultimately, the CPI is the most widely used corruption measurement indicator due to the wide global coverage, the increased reliability which comes with combining different sources, and the fact that it reconciles different points of view on what constitutes public sector corruption. For more information, please visit www.transparency.org/CPI. The corruption percentage
our breakfasts and perhaps others would be wondering when the program will be distributed, but have gone more digital this time around. We have got the small cards on our tables, respective tables. Please let's utilize these cards. Behind the card is a barcode. You can just scan that particular code and it will take you to where you can access the program and the reports as well for the CPI. So there will be no hard copies that will be distributed. We can get these things as soft copy using this particular code. We should be starting soon. We are just waiting for the item board to be done with the breakfast, and then we will proceed with our program. Thank you.
Corruption Perceptions Index, also known as the CPI, scores and ranks countries around the world based on how corrupt their public sector is perceived to be. The scores reflect the views of experts or surveys of business people, not the general public. We calculate the CPI using data from 13 different external sources. Transparency International is not involved in the production of any of these 13 datasets. The CPI includes data produced by the World Bank and the World Economic Forum, as well as by private risk and consulting companies and think tanks. Each of the 13 sources rates countries using its own scale. One source rates countries on a scale of 1 to 7, for instance, while another uses a scale of 1 to 100. As a result, direct comparison of country scores between different sources is not possible. Therefore, we transform each score from the original scale into standardized values that show the position of each country relative to others. By doing this, we are able to compare country scores across the 13 different data sources. After standardizing all scores, we then convert them into a scale from 0 to 100, which we use for the CPI. Next, we simply calculate the average of the transformed scores for each country. The average score is the CPI value for each country. In order to ensure reliability of the results, only countries with data from at least 3 sources are included in the CPI. The CPI results are comparable across time back to 2012. This is because when we convert the original data to the CPI scale, we take into account the 2012 parameters, which turns 2012 into the baseline year. Annual CPI results from before 2012 cannot be compared to other years. The 13 different data sources used to calculate the CPI all measure various aspects of corruption in the public sector. This ranges from bribery, the diversion of public funds, and the effective prosecution of corruption cases, to adequate legal frameworks, access to information, and legal protections for whistleblowers, journalists, and investigators. The CPI does not measure activities such as tax fraud, money laundering, financial secrecy, or illicit flows of money. Corruption generally involves illegal activities which are deliberately hidden and only come to light through scandals, investigations, or prosecutions. Researchers, civil society, and governments have made advances in measuring corruption in specific sectors. However, to date, there is no index which directly measures real levels of corruption in all its manifestations. The data sources that make up the CPI ask business executives and country experts questions which are based on carefully designed questionnaires. The CPI scores generally correlate with certain objective measures, including citizens' reported experience with bribery. To ensure that the CPI methodology and results are reliable, the index is regularly reviewed by independent evaluators. Such reviews have consistently shown that the CPI is statistically and conceptually coherent. Ultimately, the CPI is the most widely used corruption measurement indicator due to the wide global coverage, the increased reliability which comes with combining different sources, and the fact that it reconciles different points of view on what constitutes public sector corruption. For more information, please visit www.transparency.org/CPI.
Okay.
Stand and sing, O Zambia, proud and free, land of wake and joy in unity, victors in the struggle for their right. We've won freedom's fight, all one, strong and free. Africa is our own motherland, fashioned with and blessed by God's good hand. Let us go, our people, join as one, brothers under the sun, all one, strong and free. One land and one nation is our cry. Dignity and peace need Zambia's sky. Like a noble eagle in its flight, Zambia, praise to thee. All one, strong and free. Praise be to God. Praise be, bless our nation. Zambia, Zambia, free men we stand under the flag of our land. Zambia, praise to thee. All one, strong and free.
Thank you, Heavenly Father, for the gift of life that has brought us this far. We thank you, Heavenly Father, for the many blessings that you have bestowed upon this country. Heavenly Father, I want to thank you for bringing us again in this manner to gather and deliberate matters that pertain to the governance of this nation. We pray now, Heavenly Father, that you may descend and be with us, guide us, and we are going to discuss matters that will contribute to the growth of the nation. And at the end of it, when all is said and done, we ask that everything that is going to be discussed in here may contribute to the governance, the good governance of this country. We want to pray for those that are still coming, that you may clear their path. May you guide us and lead us. This is my humble prayer in Jesus' name. Amen. We may be seated. Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to the launch of the 2024 Corruption Perception Index. The theme for this particular report that we are about to launch is corruption and the climate crisis. It's corruption and climate crisis. Without wasting much of the time, I will now invite the Executive Director for Transparency International Zambia to give us the welcoming remarks, Mr. Morris Nyamasa. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Director of Programs. Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. All right. You are welcome to the CPI launch this morning, and apologies that we are starting the program a little later than we planned. But as we start, allow me to just recognize in our midst, first of all, our host, the Chapter President of Transparency International Zambia, Mrs. Priscilla Chansa. I'd also like to acknowledge our guest of honor, the Permanent Secretary for Administration at the Ministry of Justice, Ambassador Isabel Lemba, Mr. Ruben Lipuka, the Country Director for the Chandler Foundation in Zambia. I also acknowledge Mrs. Monica Mwansa, the Acting Director General of the Anti-Corruption Commission. Let me also acknowledge Mrs. Anoria Mashumba, who is representing the UN Resident Coordinator. I also see that we have quite a number of cooperating partners with us today. I see Mrs. Mondela from SIDA, I see Imelda from GIZ, Spencer from the US Embassy, and Bob from PTF. I also acknowledge the TIZ members who are here with us today. Mrs. Mulaisho as well, we recognize you. Fellow CSO leaders who are in the room today, senior government officials who I may not have mentioned, members of the press, let me just say, ladies and gentlemen. It is my great privilege and honor on behalf of the board, management, and staff of Transparency International Zambia to extend our very warm welcome to all of you that have joined us this morning. I also take the opportunity to welcome those joining us virtually on our various social media platforms. Today is a very special day for us because we are launching the 2024 Corruption Perceptions Index, which over the years has become a flagship event on our calendar at the beginning of each year. As many of you in here will know, the CPI is a critical research that is done at global level and is currently the most widely used measure of public sector corruption across the globe. It goes without saying that measuring corruption is essential for the development of appropriate anti-corruption interventions. And for us as a TIZ, the CPI, together with the Zambia Bright Payers Index, which we do jointly with the Anti-Corruption Commission, are both critical for customizing our interventions, as well as evaluating the progress that we are making in the fight against corruption. Today's launch, therefore, represents yet another opportunity for us as a country to take stock and reflect on our efforts in combating the scourge of corruption. It is for this reason that for this year's launch, we have decided to have an engaging panel discussion after the results are revealed, which will allow for a deeper discourse on the veracity of our anti-corruption efforts from the viewpoint of different stakeholders. So as the 2024 results get reviewed this morning, we'd like to challenge all of you stakeholders in the anti-corruption arena to use this as an opportunity to recalibrate our anti-corruption efforts. Whether the results are positive or negative, our hope is that they will strengthen our collective resolve to fight corruption in Zambia and ensure that our country's development prospects are enhanced. Ladies and gentlemen, it is now my honor and privilege on behalf of the TIZ board and general membership, and indeed on behalf of the TIZ members of staff, to officially welcome you all to the launch of the 2024 Corruption Perceptions Index. I thank you for your attention and may God bless us all.
Thanks so much, Mr. Boris Nambe, for the welcoming remarks. Without much ado, we will move on our program, and we'll straight away go into our first presentation. And this presentation is on the 2024 CPI results, the global and regional highlights, and this will be done by Mr. Mika Harwindi, who is the climate change and environmental sustainability coordinator from Transparency International. Tech team, I'm sure you can give us that presentation. Mr. Mika.
Good morning, everyone, and riding on all protocols established by my executive director. I will be giving the presentation today on global and regional highlights. And just to mention that this presentation usually is the one that you have to endure before we know Zambia's performance on the CPI. So be a little bit patient. So the first slide is really just to recap what the CPI is, which is the Corruption Perceptions Index, and the methodology. As we would all know by now, the CPI scores 180 countries and territories around the world based on perceptions of public sector corruption. So emphasis on the public sector corruption. The scores reflect the views of experts and business people. So this is a caveat in as much as we say the CPI and the P in there is for perception. It's about whose perceptions are informing the Corruption Perceptions Index. The assessment also, just to emphasize, is restricted in a sense to public sector corruption. It doesn't include corruption in the private sector, nor does it include issues to do with illicit financial flows. Still on the methodology, the CPI is calculated using data from 30 external data sources, including the World Bank, World Economic Forum, and others. And these institutions have their own ways and methodologies of assessing issues to do with governance and related to corruption. So what Transparency International does is obtain these scores and surveys, standardizes them to make them measurable based on the Corruption Perception Index. So the CPI uses a scale of 0 to 100. 100 is the score that everyone wants to get, and we want to be as far away from 0, which represents high perceptions of corruption, so high levels of corruption. And of course, because it assesses 180 countries and territories, the rank is 100 to 80. So there's a difference between the score and the rank. The rank is usually relative to a country's performance, and it's basically the position of the country in the particular year on the CPI. Moving on to global highlights. So the sad news in terms of anti-corruption activists is that based on the 2024 Corruption Perception Index, we do not see much progress in the fight against corruption, particularly public sector corruption. We have over 2/3 of countries scoring below 50 on the CPI. So 50 out of 100 would be the average mark. And we have 2/3 of countries getting a score below that. Our global average, as it was last year, is 43 out of 100. And we have more than 50% of countries scoring below the global average. So not a good picture when it comes to how we're doing in terms of the fight against corruption. Top performers, the picture remains somewhat the same as last year. So for a 7th year in a row, we have Denmark who's leading and topping the charts on the CPI with a score of 90 out of 100. So that's 10 scores shy of getting 100. We then have Finland with 88 and Singapore with 84. So those are the top 3 countries. Interestingly, this year we noticed that New Zealand has dropped its rank, moving away from the top 3 and is now placing 4th. So in terms of the top 10 countries, we have Luxembourg, Norway, Switzerland, Australia, Iceland, Ireland, who are the top 10 performers on the 2024 CPI. However, it's still not a rosy picture for our top performance on the CPI, because our analysis shows that in most of these countries, we still have issues dealing with corruption from the private sector, but particularly issues to do with illicit financial flows. If you look at some of those countries, you will see that they are well-known financial hubs for how corrupt actors can hide illicitly obtained wealth. So not everything is rosy at the top of the CPI. Bottom performance, as you might know, looking at the countries at the bottom of the CPI, there seems to be a correlation between countries experiencing conflict or highly restricted freedoms, as well as weak democracies who are ranking at the bottom of the CPI for 2024. So right at the bottom, we have South Sudan with 8, and we know some of the issues that the country or that territory is grappling with. We have Somalia with 9, Venezuela with 10. And just looking at some of those countries, for instance, Equatorial Guinea, Sudan, Democratic Republic of Congo, as the bottom performance, you see that there must be some relationship in terms of public sector corruption, as well as instability or security issues. In terms of regional highlights, again, not much has changed, unfortunately. You will see that Western Europe and the EU is the highest scoring region. And unfortunately, again, for the 2024 CPI, our region, Sub-Saharan Africa, is the lowest scoring region with 33, an average regional score of 33 out of 100. So when we begin to delve deeper a little bit of insight in what's happening in the region, the first region is the Americas, with an average regional score of 42 over 100. So the Americas is made up of North America as well as South America. And in light of the 2024 CPI theme, which is corruption and the climate crisis, what our analysis shows is that corruption is fueling environmental crime and impunity across the region. People who are familiar with this region, particularly Latin America, will attest that the issues to do with human rights violations and organized crime in the region that is feeding off the public sector corruption in that region. The next region is Asia Pacific, with a regional score of 44 out of 100. And this region is prone to natural disasters, but the analysis from the report shows that leaders are failing to stop corruption amidst the escalating climate crisis. And so here we see how corruption can interface with climate change issues and challenges. Eastern Europe and Central Asia has a score of 35 over 100. So this is the region that is at the second bottom of the 2024 CPI. And in this region, what we're witnessing is a vicious cycle of weak democracy and corruption, and also weakening democratic institutions in this region that are contributing to higher perceived levels of public sector corruption. Middle East and North Africa, 39 over 100, that is the average regional score. And here in this region, we see that corruption is linked to issues to do with authoritarianism, but also how the political system is used to clamp down on dissent and opposition, and how that fuels public sector corruption as well, given to issues that limit civic space because of the political system. Like I say, Sub-Saharan Africa is the lowest scoring region in the 2024 CPI. Not so much good news for our region. And our analysis shows that the weak anti-corruption measures really pose a threat and could undermine climate action based on this year's theme. However, when you do get to read the report, you will see that there has been some progress made by some countries in the region, which could be an encouraging sign for the region. The last region is the highest scoring region, as I indicated, with 64 over 100. But not everything is as rosy in this region. we are now seeing worsening corruption efforts given to limited commitment from the government in those countries to tackle corruption issues, but also this interfaces with the climate crisis and other challenges such as weakening rule of law, as well as threats on civic space in the EU and Western Europe Union. The analysis for the 2024 CPI also tries to contrast what is the relationship between corruption and democracy. And from the analysis, what we do find is there seems to be a correlation of sorts between corruption and democracy. So despite some outliers, the analysis shows that in countries that are classified as full democracies, so that's 24 countries, their average CPI score is 73. Flawed democracies, that's 50 countries, with an average CPI score of 47, and non-democratic regimes, that makes up 95 countries on the CPI. Their average score is 33. So we can see that it seems that corruption thrives in regimes that are non-democratic and to some extent have flawed democracies. Like I said, there are some outliers in the 2024 CPI, but overall democracy and strong institutions are crucial for combating corruption robustly and effectively because of the enabling environment created in those systems. There is a quote from our current Transparency International chair, and he notes that corruption is an evolving global threat that does far more than undermine development. Corruption is a key cause of decline in democracy, instability, and human rights violations. Now to the exciting part, at least for me, the relationship between corruption and the climate crisis. Transparency International, I think, has been hard at work trying to draw the relationship between corruption and the climate crisis. And from the research and the report, we're seeing that corruption truly poses a huge obstacle and is a significant threat to addressing the climate crisis. So the inadequacy of transparency and accountability mechanisms includes increases corruption risks in climate finance, and this extends to climate mitigation and adaptation efforts. Related to this, a quote from our current CEO for Transparency International is a call to action that we must urgently root out corruption before it derails with meaningful climate action. We must root out corruption before it derails climate action. The next slide shows a correlation between corruption and the climate crisis, but focusing more on issues to do with environmental protection. So this analysis shows that countries with a low CPI score have lower environmental health. So on the x-axis, we are measuring corruption based on the CPI. On the y-axis, we are measuring environmental health and environmental protection issues. So this shows that corruption can be a contribution or undermine environmental health and environmental protection outcomes. Another issue of concern when it comes to corruption and the climate crisis is undue influence in climate policy, particularly the heavy lobbying that we see in the global north, if I may refer to that region as such, which has led to weakening regulations when you look at the energy transition, phasing out of fossil fuel has stalled, transitioning to renewables so as to mitigate and adapt when the climate change crisis is also stalling, and this is undermining international commitments on climate action. There is also a case study in the TI report in Russia, which shows how corruption and really corruption can affect climate change projects so that they do not achieve their outcomes. So this project failed to meet any of its emission targets in Russia, and that can be attributed to issues to do with corruption, public sector corruption in that country. The last slide, just to draw home the point on how corruption and climate crisis are still interlinked. The research and analysis also shows that in countries or jurisdictions where corruption is pervasive, corruption also severely undermines the enforcement of environmental laws. So we see that some people, corrupt individuals, can bypass the system and undermine policies and regulations set up to protect the environment and the people, leading to very unfair outcomes environmentally and socially, of course, affecting those who are most vulnerable and marginalized. We also see that combating corruption is very critical, particularly when you look at emerging environmental crime. So environmental crime now is the fourth largest form of organized crime, and it's generating profits of between 82 billion United States dollars and 238 billion United States dollars. So it's a booming business, unfortunately, for criminals. Addressing corruption in the climate crisis could also help to tackle environmental crime. And then on a more sad, poignant note, the analysis also shows that in countries where we have perceived high levels of corruption, environmental defenders are greater and higher risks of violence, intimidation, and murder. From the reports, the 2024 CPI report, there is a note to say that of more than the 1,000 environmental defenders, so these are human lives, killed since 2019, almost all of them were in countries where the CPI score was below 50. So showing again the significance and the importance of tackling corruption, but also the threat that it poses to climate action, and really at the root threat it poses to activists and environmental defenders in the space. Ladies and gentlemen, this was the Global and Regional Highlights report, looking at the performance of the regions and trying to give a bit of flavor in terms of corruption and the climate crisis. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Ms. Tamika Hawindi, for that presentation. I don't know, maybe it's because the Northerners are trying to get new currents from the northern and Rwanda region. So they are trying to fight Mr. Tamika Hawindi by introducing a new spelling for crisis and crisis. So TIZ has not introduced a new spelling. There was just on the website. So the village people from Washington were waiting to attack Mr. Tamika Hawindi, but we ensure that we've got the village, so we have to go and consult our big man there. But for now, when you check on our program, we are supposed to have a CPI global highlights video, but this particular around the video, the specific video is being downloaded. And since we are not doing well with time, we will skip this to come after the presentation on the 2024 CPI Zambia's. So at this particular point in time, I invite Mr. April Chizonde, who is the Advocates Police and Research Manager from TIZ, to give us this presentation, the 2024 CPI Zambian performance. I think I'm waiting for this one and I can be able to know how we are performing despite being sub-Sahara, which is actually performing poor when it comes to the regional uh, performance. Mr. Chizon.
Thank you very much, and good morning to everyone. Let me write on the protocols already established by the Executive Director. So I'll go quickly to the presentation on Zambia's performance in 2024, which we have titled Zambia's Corruption Perception Index 2024. I will start off by briefly explaining the case study on Zambia and how we do this as Transparency International Zambia, just to provide context. So since 2022, Transparency International Zambia has been conducted a contextualized analysis of the CPI results for Zambia. This is in order to link the changes that we observed in the CPI score with key developments in the anti-corruption space. So we want to see the link because it's not just enough to say Zambia's score has improved, what has declined, but what is the reason, what is behind this particular change. So in terms of methodology, what we have been doing, we have three components to this. First, we do a trend analysis on Zambia's CPI score and the rank as we compare this to the base year of 2012. So we just compare how Zambia has been performing to the base year of 2012 in terms of trend. Then the second thing that we do is to do a comparative analysis of Zambia's CPI score, and that is compared to other countries in the sub-region. So we have selected a few countries that we use as reference points so as to be able to see what is happening in terms of Zambia's performance with reference to those particular countries. And then the third thing that we do is an analysis of data sources. As you may know that there are some underlying data sources that inform the CPI score, which is a weighted average. So we like to identify the types of corruption and the actions or interventions that explain the movement in the CPI score. So just to emphasize on those two that we are looking at, some of the data sources look at corruption types. So you are able to tell that, okay, this particular type of corruption has moved, while other data sources are looking at actual interventions, for example, transparency, fighting or prosecuting of cases. So you are able to see also that particular actions or interventions have moved in this particular year. So the identification of factors behind the changes in the CPI score is guided by the principal agent model on corruption that was proposed by Robert Quidgart. So the model simply explains that corruption is equals to monopoly power plus discretion minus accountability. So essentially, corruption in the public sector increases when selected public officials or departments are the sole providers of public services or have too much discretion in providing services or are not accountable to the public or other public institutions. So we look at those different dimensions. So although we derive no causal inferences, that is, we're not saying this is exactly what caused the change in the CPI, we are able to link each of the data sources and consequently the CPI score itself to changes in the local policy environment through desk review and some interviews that we conduct with key actors. Now to the results. That was just background. Zambia's CPI score has increased by 2 points from 37 out of 100 in 2023 to 39 out of 100 in 2024. So the rank has improved by 6 places from 98 out of 180 countries in 2023 to 92 out of 180 countries in 2024. So this is the second improvement. Obviously, you know, after a 4-point increase in 2023. In terms of comparative analysis for the country, we, as I mentioned, compare Zambia's performance to different countries in the sub-region. In 2024, Botswana's score reduced by 2 points to equal Rwanda's score, which increased by 4 points. So they are now equal. Namibia and South Africa's score were maintained, while Tanzania's increased by 1 point. And of course, we know that Zambia's score has increased by 2 points. So if you look at the performance of these countries, what we are observing here is some form of convergence, that they are moving closer to the regional average, 43, sorry, the global average of 43 out of 100. So you see countries moving closer to there. Countries that were overperforming, like Botswana, are going downwards, while other countries which are closer to 43 are being maintained. Countries like Zambia are moving up towards 43 out of 100. Now, looking at the analysis of the data sources. So in 2024, Transparency International used 9 data sources to compute Zambia's CPI. Out of the 9 data sources, only the World Economic Forum Executive Opinion Survey indicated a significant change, while the rest of the data sources were not significant. So if you look at the table that has been presented on the screen, you are able to see the individual changes. As I mentioned, what we are calling data sources here are different measures that look at different types of corruption. Others look at the different interventions we have undertaken with respect to fighting corruption. So essentially, the story that we are able to see here is that the majority of the data sources have not moved. There has not been any change, except in one, which is the World Economic Forum Executive Opinion Survey. Just a note that this particular data source was not used in last year's CPI in terms of the weighted average, because it gave us invalid results, but has been reintroduced in the 2024 CPI at a higher rate of 53 compared to 30 when we last observed it in 2022. And so we see a plus 23 increase if you look at the 2024 level compared to 2022. While we are aware that the rest of the data sources, if they have a score change of 2 points and below, that is not significant. And so we are not going to be able to go deeper into analysis of the different data sources. We'll just focus on the one which is significant, which is the World Economic Forum Executive Opinion Survey. So the question that is there now is what has informed the improvement. So the analysis of the data sources implies that Zambia's CPI score increased from 37 out of 100 in 2023 to 39 out of 100 in 2024 due to the 23-point improvement in the World Economic Forum Executive Opinion Survey. So as we have observed that all other data sources recorded insignificant changes. So the World Economic Forum Executive Opinion Survey measures the prevalence of bribery in business operations, including imports and exports, taxation, procurement, and judicial decisions. It also collects perceptions on the level of diversion of public funds to companies, individuals, or groups due to corruption. Therefore, we attribute the improvements in the CPI to reduce bribery in business operations due to electronic government service reforms, such as the digitalization of the mining license application process, enhanced beneficial ownership requirements in procurement, and the increase in the number of public institutions promulgating service charters. These are linked to greater accountability and reduced discretion in public service delivery with reference to the model that I shared with you, which helps us to identify where the change is coming from. Let me end with implications and some conclusions, which are important. Number one, due to the 2-point move towards 100, 100 is very clean, the level of public sector corruption in Zambia has reduced in 2024 as compared to 2023. That's the conclusion. Number two, due to below 50 out of 100 score, corruption is still endemic in Zambia, and the country remains below the global average score of 43 out of 100. So kind of bittersweet, right? We have improved, but we still need to have our eye towards where we are supposed to be going. As long as we are scoring below 50 out of 100, we are calling that the point of corruption being endemic in a country. So we are still saying we need to do more. And as long as we are scoring below 43 out of 100, we are still below the global average. So we are not yet even above average. You can have a, for example, if you have a child that your child is going to school and they score below average, you are still concerned, right? Yeah, you're still going to be concerned that the score is below average. Something else that is also concerning in terms of the major conclusions, due to the lower point improvements in 2024, which is 2 points, as compared to 2023, which improved by 4 points, our conclusion is that efforts aimed at combating public sector corruption are on a decelerating trend as opposed to accelerating. And that, I think, should also be something we should take note of. If your child at school, again, improves by 4 points this year, and next year they only improve by 2 points, you have to be concerned, because we are expecting the improvements to be also going higher. So it means that at this rate, the last conclusion, therefore, if government takes no corrective action to reignite the anti-corruption fight, the CPI score is likely to be maintained or to decline during the year 2025. I don't want to sound like a prophet, but that is what the trend points to. Unless there's something that is going to be taken, agent action that is going to be taken to be able to deal with the current trend we are on. Yes, we have improved, but with a smaller margin compared to last time. So it's possible, very possible, that we may end up with a zero change next time, where the CPI score is going to end up being maintained. So unless corrective action is taken, we are going to end up with 2025 still at 39 out of 100. Thank you very much for your attention.
Okay, thank you so much. That was Mr. Chizonde, right, giving us the presentation on the 2024 CPI for Zambia. We have seen for ourselves, of course, that is a 2 points. There is a 2 points increase there. And of course, I think his last statement, I think, is key as well. We need to do more so that we can be able to increase that numbers. All right, I know the art, but for now, maybe we can hold on to the questions. We listen to the video, which I think this presentation. That's the CPI Global Highlights video. And thereafter, we'll go straight into a panel of discussion. And after that, we'll open it up for question and answer session.
Corruption seriously harms the environment and is a major driver of the climate crisis. It often remains hidden, but most environmental crimes happen because corruption enables them. Whether it's politicians creating policies and laws under the influence of fossil fuel companies, forests and biodiversity lost to illegal logging and shell companies used to launder the proceeds, or failed and faulty infrastructure projects like coastal defenses or emergency shelters awarded to those with ties to the government, corruption takes many forms. Corruption also takes indigenous people's lands, and when environmental defenders raise their voices, they are harassed and even killed. The climate crisis, like corruption, is a matter of life or death. Transparency International is working to make sure corruption does not destroy the planet. Join us.
Much that's the short. Okay, that's the short video, just highlighting the global highlights, which are Zambia. At this particular point in time, we will move and we are going straight into the panel of discussion, just to reflect on the 2024 CPI scheme and also the results. What are the implications for Zambia now that we have just improved by 2 points as compared to 2023 when we had improved by 4 points. So allow me to invite to the podium here. Suffice to make mention that this panel of discussion, of course, will be moderated by Mr. Ruben. And allow me to invite the big man to the podium here. Mr. Ruben. Allow me also to invite the Anti-Corruption Commission, representatives from the Anti-Corruption Commission to come to the podium. Of course, that's the acting general for the Anti-Corruption Commission. May I also invite the representative of the National Assembly and see two honorables here. I'm assuming it's honorable one. May I also invite representatives from the Ministry of Green Economy, Ministry of Green Economy and Development.
The strange city.
Okay, and then
Someone's going a vote.
do we have a panelist from biocarbon partners? Okay, I see none. With the power vested in me and direct control through the executive, Mr. Morris, allow me to invite my son to be on the panel as well. Mr. Grant. All right, this is the panel that's going to give us more insights in terms of applications with respect to the results that have been presented as far as CPI is concerned for 2024. I think it would be good to understand what's the implication of 2-point increase and what we need to do perhaps that we in the 2025 index. I now hand over to Mr. Ruben Defuka, who's going to moderate this particular session. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Is my mic on? All right. Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. I thought there's everything to celebrate. People are too quiet. Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. To begin with, I Hope that if any Easterners, please don't buy me this sofa for my home. It's like we're in a boat. We're really down in the boat. The whole purpose of this panel discussion is to provide for reactions. But let me set, to begin with, that each year, Transparency International decides on a theme as a basis to interpret the CPI results. So you'll not find corruption and climate every year. There could be a different theme in the coming year. But we're privileged that this year, Transparency International has decided that we are going to use the context of corruption and climate change in order to interpret the CPI results. So for those of us in the space of environmental protection and climate change, this is a very welcome development. A couple of years ago, the global report on climate change, and it did raise very important pointers as to the sort of policy and legislative reforms that we need around the world. So the purpose of this panel discussion is to provide an opportunity for us to listen to different perspectives, reflecting on the 2024 CPI theme and the findings that have been ably presented. So I do have with me a panel of able and distinguished speakers. Madam Monica Mwansa, who's the Acting Director General from the Anti-Corruption Commission, Honorable Twambo Mutinta, who's also from a caucus on the environment, and you say more, caucus on environment and climate change. And I almost said Honorable Bright is on there, but maybe that will be coming in the next couple of years. But a few things which Tamika has already highlighted. Why do we want to focus on corruption and climate change? Corruption and climate change presents what is now being referred to as the two biggest challenges that the world or humanity is facing. Climate change, as we know, affects daily activities of members of the general public. Even accessing water, accessing land has been affected by climate change. Agriculture practices have been affected. Industrial activities have been affected. However, the magnitude of the problem of climate change is made worse when corruption enters into the picture. Funds that are meant for climate change adaptation or mitigation are diverted to other areas. They are diverted to people's pockets. When embezzlement is allowed to take hold in a particular country, particularly for funds that are meant for climate change, we make the climate change situation even worse. We've heard of how lobbyists around the world are trying to capture either policy or the state in order to have favorable outcomes for their own work. We've heard of how environmental corruption, environmental crime is now the fourth largest in the organized crime space. So the question really is, how do we then ensure that we achieve the goals for climate mitigating or adapting to climate change by ensuring that we deal with the corruption levels in our country? That is what we want to discuss. And I was going to start with the representative of the ministry who are not here, but we'll come back to the questions I was going to ask them. And maybe Honorable Tinta could speak to that when his time comes. Do we have measures in the policy framework for climate change to tackle elements of corruption? Be it corruption in the manner that climate finances are being handled, or the way licenses and other permits are being given, which then provide opportunities for further corruption and climate challenges that we're facing. But I want to start with Madam Monica Mwansa, SCC. What's your reaction? 2 points improvement on the CPI. Are we doing enough? And are there measures that you're putting in place as the SCC to ensure that in the next year, we're not talking about 2 points improvement. We should be talking about 4 points or even 5 points improvement. Madam Wansi.
Thank you so much. Allow me to express my desire for it and desire and especially this finance. We should also remember to continue the fight this corruption. With regards to the corruption of the independence, several struggles have been achieved over the past 2 years. Independently, in the CPI from the degree in 2019 and 2023, and be informed that it is 20 points from 27 to 39. There was improved by 6 points from 98 to 92. That was very exciting and encouraging the fight against corruption. The 2024 CPI comes and corruption convictions that includes these years. So some of the convictions that includes this judicial reforms. The judicial reform is establishment of the economic contribution and sports. In also in enhancing justice story that is dedicated towards dealing with corruption and other transformation practices. We also saw the criminalization of the bureaucracy and forced economic and financial rules that made it both operational and the rules clearly targeted institutional or related offenses must be done within 5 months. Another condition is the establishment of an internet this framework is ensure that both human and financial resources are put together to fight against corruption. Under the framework, we have different law enforcement agencies as well as agencies that come together to put together the human and financial resources and we investigate and corruption or massive recovery. The intention of private sector inspection so that they lose peace. In order to discriminate producers of private within the business environment, but engaging the practices of corruption and private business. These efforts are able to create a fair and just business landscape, promoting the development of all economic services. I also want to speak to the anti-corruption shifts towards the European Union in adapting itself to the future narrative in this stage. Criminals should never be allowed to enjoy either of classes. And that, the Commission and country will continue to apply information based knowledge and information based knowledge. The Commission will continue to ensure that criminals will not be abused from either of their classes. We will ensure that we will together to empower the resources we work hard for. And with all mentions, I also want to communicate on the improvements of for us to define a positive shift in how corruption is seen by the experts as well as the business leaders. The one indicates compensation experts transparency, reform anti-corruption measures, and strengthen the governance institutions. We have to see the slight improvement and agents from so by 4 points, and now it's by 2 points. We have been managed to set by more than 4 points. And that multiplying the least represent points. Something we are happy with and we are celebrating. Is it not a good thing? Even if it is another long time, it was a remote space. Actually, contributing to something, and we are seeing things changing and happening. This show, this show is the country of the nations reports and pages. And the invitation for our information is the following: enhance governance and accountability. When we are told this, the public officials and institutional operations will increase integrity and accountability. This can be without policy reforms, standard legal reforms, and dividend reform corruption rules. We do have the rules and also policies that are corruption. We have that was actually through small and to get these of both policies and the legal improvements that are not found. We created that confidence. And we the corruption to create a more stable and predictable business environment. This is the goals of which is crucial for growth and development. It involves five at the company of seven peoples, they are taught constitutions and to grow. This increased issue has education support professional reforms. This coupled with institutionalization of the institutions is advanced the public sector and also continues to face to fight corruption and ultimately to improve the public confidence we have to fight against corruption. Also, one lastly, to the global decision that the country we can benefit from the improvement is CPI's and improve CPI's enhance economic standards. It requires the global community and nations committed for corruption, according to international standards with transparency and accountability. We are not being wished to the global community, but mission to work we should we see this for it is our mission to be so the global operation the next private in this college. The dedication to case of we will indeed collaborate with partners the citizen and the citizens are human populations corruption. We will keep our sure foundations and guide and put in place and recognize to really reform development so that the global operation
Thank you very much. But before we move to the next speaker, you've talked about all the positive things that you're doing. Now, I would have wanted to also listen to some of the challenges. The perception out there is that you're selective in your investigation of corruption cases, that you're not dealing with present-day corruption. The perception out there is that the conviction rate is low. Would you want to say something about that? And are you dealing with environmental corruption? The Financial Intelligence Center has previously reported of environmental corruption. And I would be interested to know whether, as SEC, you're dealing with that, but also some of those challenges which have been raised. Madam Master.
To start insurance, our with regards to the commission, we are increasing the rate of commission. And we feel we can see more in the commissions. We feel a recommendation where we are supposed to use our secretary within our. So the only is more commissions because this is the high for as opposed to the higher
the issuance of mining licenses and activities within the mining sector. We've been investigating such cases as the Anti-Corruption Commission and prosecution at court, and with regard to the prosecution of these, I know we do work together also with the National Prosecution Authority in the institution that is in charge of all prosecution that prosecute climate change related offenses. This also takes us to related offenses that are already brought in prosecuted and investigation.
Thank you very much. Thank you. That's a nice thing. Honorable Tinta. The Parliamentary Caucus on Environment and Climate Change. Firstly, you could just give us a brief highlight as to what this caucus is all about. And then what is your reaction to Zambia's performance on the CPI? And how does this then relate to the whole agenda of promoting environmental protection and fighting climate change? Honorable Tinta. So much. We value this important where we will make a difference. This one must begin by I must begin by stating that the progression that has been put with regard to the action uh, on corruption
To me, the number might look a bit insignificant, but I would want to state that it's a step in the right direction. And I would want to applaud the Anti-Corruption Commission and TIZ itself for the efforts that I think in the last 3 years they've been making in ensuring that corruption is demystified and also the public understands the effects of corruption. Because you all know that to a very large extent, corruption has brought a lot of underdevelopment in this country. And if we work together to fight corruption, parliamentarians, the civil society organizations, and corruption commission, and the community that we represent ourselves and representatives of people, we might be able to see a significant reduction in the cases of in the index of corruption in this country. But I want to first of all begin by mentioning that in the report that was presented, one of the key findings was that corruption is something which is highly embedded in our community. And I want to mention that as a representative of the people, I also strongly agree that this issue is highly embedded in our community, and all of us, we still have a long way to go to ensure that the progression of reduction in corruption and the figures become so significant. Just to give you an example for it, last week we saw a district commissioner in Livingston who was able to expose a young person who wanted to corrupt. And I took about 5 minutes just to read the comments in the media. And I learned that the majority of the young people, the majority of the Zambians, they were condemning that district commission who was bringing out the corrupt practice. And so for me, I sat and I was talking to myself and said, we still have a lot of it. Here is somebody who is bringing this issue to the public, and all the insults, condemnation went to the district commissioner who was bringing out that issue. And that just helps me to agree that corruption, it's an issue which is endemic, and we still have a long way to go, but we don't need to give up because the figures are showing that there is a set reduction. And this is as a result of the efforts that are being made by different stakeholders. Then talking to the other issue, as the parliamentary focus on environment and climate change, our role is oversight. And just like the topic today, corruption with regard to climate change, it's a very important topic and it has come at the right time. Everyone agrees that right now in Zambia, we all agree that climate change is not a hoax. Because we have witnessed what is happening. This time, even a common person is able to see the effects of climate change. And bringing a conversation where we are in climate change to corruption, I'm hearing this conversation to understand, and I think it's something that we need to continue to amplify. There is significant evidence to what's happening, the effects of corruption to our natural resources. The effects of corruption in the environmental sector is very evident. The only difference is that the corruption that takes place in the environmental sector, it's a bit technical. It's not something which is in public domain. We have seen the elite making changes in the land use. And the common person might not understand how that change has come about, but all that is perpetuated by corruption that takes place in the councils, in the ministries, and some of the land use that are being made in this country. They are the causes of this perpetual crisis that we are witnessing in Lusaka. I might not cite examples, but some of the issues are in public domain. So when this corruption is taking place in the environmental sector, very few people, common people, they don't pay attention. But the effects, we feel them, or we might see them, but we might not connect the effects of climate change to some of the bad vices that are taking place with regard to corruption. I'll give an example in the mining sector. which my sister did mention, a lot of licensing is taking place, even to areas where we are not supposed to give licenses. Then the effects of climate change is hitting a common person. Water management, drilling of boreholes, there's just this amount of chaos. It's happening, the effects are hitting on a common person. Issues around the management of the national parks. Me, I come from a constituency which is in the Kapui National Park. We know what is happening, how land is allocated, how poor people are displaced, women are displaced. So this is very technical, but we need to begin to apply this conversation and align corruption to the effects to the natural resource and also to the effects to the common people like the communities that we share. Upon setting, it's a new issue. And I thought somebody was going to sit here. We are already hearing about issues taking place around community beneficiation, how the licenses around carbon trading are being awarded. We went to Kenya to learn how they're doing. So these are some of the issues that are the focus on the environment and climate change. We are also beginning to take keen interest and wishing to work with TIZ and many other partners in amplifying these voices. From the parliamentary point of view, again, Mr. I want to mention that we remain committed to fighting corruption. You are aware that the Public Accounts Committee, where my colleague Honorable assisted many others, they've continued to hold controlling functions tasks. And this includes the Ministry of Green Economy and many other ministries that are given the responsibility to manage our natural resources. The Anti-Corruption Act will continue to look at it and see how best do we improve it. And I must mention that the allocation towards corruption in the budget, I'm not because of the figure, but I'm aware that last year's budget, the amount increased. It would have not increased significantly, but there's a slight difference. One of the things we want to see as parliamentarians, now that resources are moving to the district's devolution, we also want to see an investment of the oversight function that corruption commission sitting in a states. We want to see a corruption commission sitting in an aurora. Resources are now at the lowest level, but we don't have these structures at the lowest levels. The poor people, the illiterate women and men, they feel that the Anti-Corruption Commission is an elite organization. We have received the report of corruption. Myself, as a member of parliament, I'm a small anti-corruption. Most people they call me, but when you ask people to provide evidence, they disappear. When you ask people to give you a bit more information, there's that fear. So we need to find the way that we make this focus also closer to the people so that the people can be very free to give information. But I can assure you, the mindset change. Where people still sympathize with the politician who has been arrested for stealing your money. The whole world will stand and sympathize with that politician. They will go directly to defend that politician. I think we have a lot of work to demystify our minds and also demonstrate that corruption is deprive the poor people of the basic social station that will drive their lives. Thank you so much.
Great. Thank you very much, Honorable. Thank you very much, Honorable Mutinta. In my mind, I was still thinking of Honorable Mutinta in the civil society, because he was from civil society. But he's gone through a transformation. He's a politician. Give him the mic, he'll be here until midday, but points have been well made. Bright, let me come to you briefly so that you just amplify on this. If you look at the sources for the CPI for this year, the African Development Bank has improved by 2 because last year African Development Bank and the World Bank had the lowest scores. But the World Bank score remains the same. My worry is on the World Economic Forum. Any changes to the World Economic Forum's goal for 2025 could either see us remaining at 39 or could even see a reduction. What's your reading into the World Economic Forum data? Is this just an outlier or their methodology is sound and we can therefore project, if we do everything correctly, an improvement in the CPI?
Thank you very much. I was expecting that question. So I think with the data sources, we took some time to look at all the different data sources. As we mentioned, there are about 9 data sources we use for Zambia on a consistent basis. In 2023, the World Economic Forum Executive Opinion Survey data generated what we call invalid results. And so maybe just a bit of context to the robustness of the CPI methodology. So because we are getting data from different data sources, we want to make sure that one particular data source does not throw out the average because of the particular results that are coming from that data source. So we have very robust checks in terms of making sure that the data source provides all those boxes before we can actually include it in the CPI for that particular year. So historically, what we observed with respect to this particular data source is that it's a bit more responsive than other data sources. So when there is a positive development, it tends to improve more than the others. When there is a decline, it also tends to reduce more significantly than others. So this issue is something that has been raised of concern by different researchers, of course, and has now been addressed as of 2024 in terms of how responsive this particular data source is. So hence its reintroduction in 2024 as we can say more robust data source now moving forward. But just to clarify that even if there has been some adjustments in terms of the CPI methodology because of the reintroduction of the economic product, the CPI score itself, the average is still variable up to 24. So everything is still fine. But moving forward, I think we are more assured now that the performance of this great. I know we're running out of time. Like 2, 3 questions from the audience, then we can proceed. I've seen my brother Benji there. Let's start with Benji first. Then we'll move to this side of the company. I think all that. But let's start with Benji. There's a gentleman there. I'll come to the ladies. Social justice. Started production of information. Yes, yeah. So if you go action, they check it. Say the corruption just straight. All right. Let's take note of that. Come back to it. There's a gentleman on the side. The cameraman is blocking this right. See the gentleman. Yes, sir. This is the name and the organization you represent.
Well, my name is Raymond. David Marie here. I want to know that people consider basically like a number of enemies around corruption in the religious sector. But what I want to understand is that maybe for example, the perspective that we know obviously it's that maybe the age of strong and then these one group want to settle reviews. Therefore, something And then I know that one of the remarks that the US ambassador, where you go to send the US, and you say that because of $500 if they did straight, which about society to the environment. So the person that I have is especially the RTPG, that's also commission. We ensure that all the things that are collected now are not lost to corruption so that we can develop the country. Because the age starts to trend, so we need inside the community.
All right, thank you. There's a lady, I think that now that, let me check the two ladies and then Mrs. Becca very briefly. Just make your points very briefly. And now that the other lady, Mrs. Becca will be the last.
Thank you for the presentation. My name is now. Just to quickly recap, we were told that what contributed to the CPI this was in financial practice strategies, integrity mechanisms, and then this year we've outlined the service strategies. And when you look at these variables, in my mind, we are on the trajectory of getting it wrong. So my question is, where are we getting it wrong? That's the answer. The second part is, how is key mindset considering different analysis to help reach the average growth average? Because it's one thing to have the contributing factors, it's another thing to new direction to reporting issues to governments that we can consider so that it meets growth.
Thanks, Madam. Madam. Just speak a little bit louder. Sorry, I'm getting on.
So I begin with
Okay. Great. Mr. Becca, Simon.
Thank you so much. Expression disappointment. They were saying that the issue of BCP here, why they charge such an importance and we have the business and we use it. I think the and the private these two, if they were mentioned, I think they are very good. Don't know which one. Actually, I mean, when you say this, I don't think it's right. Let me see this one. Although it was made from a very one of the insurance. I think.
All right. Thank you very much. So let's, there's one, the man doesn't want us to respond. Anyway, he's smiling at me. So very briefly, I only pray I'm not from the East, but very briefly. Oh, sorry, William. Go ahead. Go ahead. Just introduce yourself, sir. Go ahead. Thank you very much. Well, to the answer set, let's start with the questions that I think lie with you. The issue of encroachment and investment in the environmentally sensitive areas, but also how can we enhance the voice of indigenous communities who are really guardians of the environment. Briefly.
Thank you so much. Maybe before answering the question, I also want to echo the sentiments that you echoed. That we needed to change the conversation.
Mhm.
And also, that the concept is really already is a demonstration that the community is the climate change is serious. Because there are also so if they are attending a different meeting, then corruption continues. So who achieve some success, but all the success will be eroded by corruption. So I think it's something which is not good. And then if I net the this really economic foundation, this outcome that's a very bad couch. Shall what I this is this is a very important that we need them to be here so that it starts taking corruption serious in the climate change sector. And I must mention that I'm not aware if the climate change bill had the mention of corruption at any point. I stand to be corrected at the point when it was starting on the front house. So I never took so much interest. But it's something that I think my colleagues said there's no mention and corruption or corruption fights in the climate change bill. So these are some of the issues that I feel if they were in this space, there are conversations that we would build up as we try to address these challenges. The issue of encroachment, the private sector versus indigenous people's rights, particularly women um, in the rural areas like where I'm from. So this again borders on community awareness and the level of information in terms of their land rights, their human rights, and also their environmental rights. I must mention that in most of these rural areas where we come from, you will never even find a civil society organization that is fighting against corruption. And this again comes back to even questioning the credibility of the civil society organizations that are in the climate change sector. How accountable are they? How do they make the monies that are given by the donor? Somebody spoke about the shrinking donor space by the Trump administration. So these questions start arise. The little money that these social organizations are given, who is holding them to account for the environmental, for the money that they are administering on the environment? Who is holding them to account? Do we have community-based organizations that are fighting corruption at the community level? Are these conversations being built at the lowest level? Because we come from rural areas, and when these conversations are being debated in hotels and here, some of us were at a loss because we feel this conversation should also, this report needed to go to the state and be heard by the marketeers. Because these are the people who are facing the wrath of corruption. This report needed to go to the distressed women in the national parks by investors. Because these are the people that are feeding the wrath of corruption. So I strongly feel we need to find mechanisms like civil society organizations working on corruption. Let them start operating in the rural areas and target the actual people that are victims of corruption. If somebody wanted to induce me in a corruption, I would feel it was about right. But how about the poor woman who doesn't know how to do it right? She has no idea on this policy. It's a far-fetched idea to her. She doesn't own a phone. If she's going through such kind of humiliation, she's helpless. And that's the reason why I said we members of parliament, we are mean anti-corruption. Because these issues, they come to our office and you try to tell someone that there's police, conference commission, there's anti-corruption. Someone has no idea. She doesn't even know where to start from. They end up just giving up, helpless, because we have not reached a point where at the lowest level, there are structures that will support someone to report without victimization and give information that will help to ensure that there's justice and also human rights of the people are upheld.
All right. Thank you very much. Madam Wansa, there were questions that were directed at you. Yes, you highlight what's happening in the e-government, policy changes, legislative changes. But how is it that we're not getting to Copenhagen? We're not getting to Denmark. That's the jargon in the anti-corruption space. Why are we not making the quantum leap, as it were, on the CPI? What's holding back this progress? And probably if you could say anything about private finance, is that something that you're aware of, the corruption in the utilization of climate finance? Very briefly.
The is this was together. So in this
After that, it was in the first quarter of last year that we had the rules specifying that prosecution must be done within 5 months, that was operationalized. So we start building up on the good things or the good measures that have been put in place. So from the first quarter of last year, we've had some prosecution within 5 months. We've seen some matters being concluded on appeal within 5 months. We are also yet to see many more appeals and many more convictions and conclusions of cases within 5 months. So it's not like we are not getting somewhere, we are not getting there. We are on our way to there. We will get there. And I think things have already started showing that we actually getting there. With regards to funding in the meant for climate governance, I want to indicate that what can be done is adherence to applicable laws and procedures in the utilization of these funds. Prevention is better than cure. So as the Anti-Corruption Commission, we want to preach prevention. We want to preach adherence to these laws and procedures so that the money can be used for the intended purposes so that we can actually have the money meant for climate change governance actually go to climate change governance. When that is not adhered to, of course, we are going to investigate and prosecute the lack of adherence to the law and applicable procedures.
And briefly, I also want to comment on the loss of funds with regard to the question that was raised on the mining sector. What can the anti-corruption do? So last year, the first quarter of last year, we had our national policy on anti-corruption launched. The policy emphasizes mainstreaming corruption prevention in the public sector. So with regard to some of the activities under one of the measures for implementation of the anti-corruption policy on the national policy on anti-corruption, we have some activities that have been highlighted in the implementation plan to include natural resources audits, establishing mechanisms that promote transparency in the issuance of operating licenses and permits in the mining, wildlife, lands, and water sectors, raise awareness on communities' accountability and anti-corruption actions in natural resources, and engage the leadership on anti-corruption in an accountable for accountability in the management of natural resources. So as the Anti-Corruption Commission, working together with other stakeholders, we are already working on some of these activities to implement these measures so that we can ensure that the revenue is collected and used in the right way. We are already working with the Zambia Revenue Authority, the Ministry of Mines, as well as with the Ministry of Justice to ensure that we sensitize the public, to ensure that we also talk about how corruption can be prevented in this sector, to ensure that revenue is actually collected so that it can be used for the intended purposes and intended beneficiaries. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Bright, very briefly, Binge's question, just kindly explain. I think the understanding is that we use a theme to develop the CPI, but it's the other way around. We do the CPI in the standard way, but we interpret the results using the theme that has been designated for that particular year. But just explain that.
Thank you very much. So each year we do CPI, which is a measure of corruption. So there are two things happening. We have the standard measure itself, which is the measure of corruption, which is separately from the policy. So the analysis of the rankings are based on the performance of powers of corruption, as drawn from the different questions that are asked through the so that's again the core analysis of the CPI is separate from that particular. So even this year, the ranking say for countries is not based on current. However, to assess the country's lesson, for example, one of the features I think we call it the measures we are in terms of correlation, that countries, so that is what so so in this example, so if you look at the
So, something like that. So, that's the CPI. Analysis for what we take to do for free. How in terms of specific nature, not from the different places. I was hoping the Lord has come with a checkbook. GIZ that GIZ enact will do that. I'm told there are questions from the online audience. I'll get one or two. Zanje, very quickly, so that we can move on with our program. Where are you, Zanje? All right. Bright. Can we, what recommendations do you have to improve the CPI score? Right. SSC kind of talked about the engagement with CSOs and other players, so we'll not go through that. I know we're running out of time. Maybe just to say, I think this is an important conversation that needs to go on. I'm hoping that this is not the first and last time that we're going to talk about corruption and climate change. I'm looking forward to the Parliamentary Caucus on the Environment and Climate Change moving private members' motions in Parliament in order to address any of the loopholes, i.e., if there are no anti-corruption measures in the Climate Change Act. Nothing stops Honorable Mutinta and his colleagues from moving a private member's motion. We're looking forward to the SEC continuing the engagement with stakeholders, but also just dealing more proactively with some of the concerns that the general public have in the fight against corruption. And lastly, TIZ, we hope to see you right on the ground where the communities are in Teji and other places and not just having meetings in the urban areas. So thank you very much, and thank you to the members of the audience.
Thank you, Mr. Wilson.
Mr. Chair. So, the chair is
Once more again, thank you to the panel for unpacking the theme and also highlighting implications of the results for Zambia. We will move on to allow the media houses to bring back their guidance to this podium as we move to the keynote speech, which is the response from government with respect to the 2024 CPI results. And at this particular point in time, I will invite the Executive Director for Transparency International Zambia to invite the guest of honor who is going to give us the keynote speech. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Yeah, of course. Yeah.
I thought I was getting a medal for at least not being here. The honorable members of parliament here with us this morning, Madam Priscilla Chansa, our gracious host, and Transparency International Zambia chapter president, Madam Monica Mwansa, the acting director general of the Anti-Corruption Commission, other government officials here present, representatives of our cooperating partners, Transparency International board members here present, Mr. Morris Nyambe, the Executive Director of Transparency International Zambia, and of course, my brother, Mr. Ruben Lifuka, the Country Director of the Chandler Foundation, the different leaders and members of civil society organizations, distinguished guests, members of the press, of course. Now I'm going to climate change and crisis, climate. So it's rubbing off on all of us. Members of the press, our dear friends, ladies and gentlemen. It is my singular honor and privilege on behalf of the government of the Republic of Zambia and indeed the Honorable Minister of Justice, Honorable Princess Kasune, Member of Parliament for Kembe, to deliver this keynote speech at the launch of the 2024 Corruption Perceptions Index report. The CPI, typically published at the beginning of the calendar year, serves as a crucial time for reflection and assessment of anti-corruption efforts at global, regional, and national levels. And you'll allow me to state that it has come at an opportune time for us as Zambia, but most importantly for us at Ministry of Justice, because you'll be pleased to note that this year, Zambia is being peer reviewed at the African Union under the African Union peer review mechanism. And so what we have gotten here today, the good news that we have received, will really help us continue in this fight against anti-corruption, against corruption. The ministry has taken note of the stagnation in the global fight against corruption, as indicated in the 2024 CPI findings. The report reveals that 56% of countries scored below the global average of 43 of 100, as we saw in the slides. We as government also recognize that countries at the top of the index are not free from governance challenges. As we saw, there was no single country that attained 100. Corruption, therefore, continues to undermine law enforcement and weakens governance structures worldwide. It is, of course, encouraging to note that Zambia's CPI score has increased from 37 to 39, 37 in 2023 to 39 this year. Our ranking, as we saw, has improved by 6 places from 98 to 92nd out of 180 countries. This improvement, although some might consider it marginal, it is an improvement and it builds on the previous year's gains and reflects the commitment and resolve of the UPND administration, with the support, of course, of all of our partners in reducing public sector corruption in Zambia. This year's 2-point improvement, while following a 4-point increase in 2023, makes the score of 39 the highest that Zambia has achieved on the CPI since 2012. While this is indeed a remarkable achievement showcasing our continued progress, but of course, we do note that much more remains to be done. And this is by all of us, public and private sector, citizens at large. Honorable
our Honorable Member of Parliament, Teji, did remind us, and Bright, I think, also made mention of it, that this fight is for all of us. It is not a government fight alone. All of us have a role to play in the fight against corruption. And through the visionary leadership of our president, Mr. Hakainde Hichilema, we would like to state that government remains firmly committed to the anti-corruption fight. The Republican president, you may recall in his recent address to the diplomatic corps at the annual diplomatic greeting at the beginning of this year, he reiterated government's dedication to combating corruption. And he continues to call upon all of us to be allergic to corruption. As partners and stakeholders are aware, the government led by through the Ministry of Justice has made significant progress in reviewing the Anti-Corruption Act No. 3 of 2012. This process has been participatory and consultative with the aim of having the revised Anti-Corruption Act with progressive refinements by the end of this year. The implementation of the amended Act in tandem with the national policy on anti-corruption, which was launched last year, as we're reminded by the acting DG, and of course, the subsequent national consultative meeting, which we also recently held, organized by the anti-corruption, will provide further impetus to the anti-corruption fight in Zambia. As we may all be aware, government has addressed the leadership vacuum in the Anti-Corruption Commission by appointing commissioners and a substantive director general, subject, of course, to Parliament's ratification. Further, to ensure transparency and accessibility of public information, the government issued the Access to Information Commencement Order in June 2024. The operationalization of this critical act through the required regulations, rules, and guidelines is underway to ensure its effective implementation. In addition, in the 2025 national budget, resources have been allocated to equip the Human Rights Commission, which is the institution mandated with the oversight of the access to information, to undertake this important mandate, which is its implementation effectively. Allow me to mention that government has continued to channel significant resources to law enforcement agencies and oversight institutions to enable them perform their duties independently and judiciously. Coordination among law enforcement agencies has also been enhanced through the interagency framework. And if we watched the news last night, we would have seen the DPP, the Director of Public Prosecution on the Copperbelt, launching the Interagency Coordination Cooperation Framework among the LEAs. And so as we reflect on the 2024 theme, which is corruption and the climate crisis, this administration acknowledges the seriousness of the threat that climate change has to our very existence and also our developmental aspirations. Corruption, including undue influence in climate policy and action, undermines real progress in addressing the climate change threat. I'm happy to state that in response to calls from different stakeholders for specific legislation on climate change, the Ministry of Justice, in collaboration with the Ministry of Green Economy and Environment, drafted the Green Economy and Climate Change legislation. This legislation was presented to Parliament and assented to by the President of the Republic in December of 2024. The Green Economy and Climate Change Act No. 18, 2024, provides climate change adaptation, mitigation, and disaster risk reduction. It establishes a comprehensive governance structure for climate change issues, incorporating all relevant parties in its decision-making process. The Act also regularizes carbon markets in Zambia, considering the increased demand for carbon offset mechanisms globally and nationally. And of course, as Honorable Mutinta Kwambo mentioned to us, we have a lot of work as government, but also with your partners in dealing and addressing this very key issue, especially with those who do not have access to resources. And so as government, as a ministry, Ministry of Justice and Ministry of Green Economy, working with all the partners, including Smart Zambia, to ensure that access of this critical information is made available to people in the most rural areas of the country. And so this domesticates the United Nations Framework Convention on Climate Change and the Paris Agreement. Distinguished ladies and gentlemen, the enactment of this act demonstrates our government's commitment to addressing climate change and governance issues seriously. We are also developing benefit sharing mechanism guidelines to ensure that benefits accrued from mechanisms such as carbon trading, as I've indicated, benefit the communities and citizens. This will support adversely affected communities in mitigating and adapting to climate change challenges while improving their livelihoods. We are working tirelessly to ensure transparency and participation in such mechanisms. And when I say we, it includes all of you ourselves, all of you here, our partners. In conclusion, I would like to reiterate this administration's commitment to fighting corruption and to call upon all partners and well-meaning citizens to join this fight, because this fight requires all of our collective efforts. The 2024 CPI results indicate that Zambia has made progress in reducing public sector corruption, improving by 2 points this year. This government is resolute in achieving further strides and positioning Zambia as a front runner. We've gotten a challenge from Mr. Letuka that we should get to the top. We shall, Mr. And it requires all of us to be committed and determined that we shall. We need to tell ourselves we shall. We need to act in such a way that we shall. So my clarion call to all of us is, let corruption be a fight that all of us are involved in, all of us are committed in. I thank you. I leave my medal.
Thank you so much. Ministry of Justice believes a keynote speech on the 2024 corruption research leaders results for Zambia. Ladies and gentlemen, we need to move to the next phase of our program. Basically, here we are going to have the 2024 CPI media statements and recommendations. And this will be done by the chapter president from Transparency International Zambia, research on charter. I take this privilege to invite the chapter president for Transparency International Zambia to give us the media statement. Madam.
The guest of honor, the Permanent Secretary Administration, Ministry of Justice, Ambassador, member, may I please write on the protocol already established? Good morning. I can't hear the response. Good morning. It is my honor on behalf of Transparency International Zambia to stand before you today as we release the findings of the 2024 Corruption Perceptions Index. Each year, the launch of the CPI gives us, as anti-corruption stakeholders, an opportunity to reflect on Zambia's efforts in the fight against corruption. This year's CPI report is themed around corruption and the climate crisis, and thereby provides us an important perspective on how national, regional, and global anti-corruption efforts intertwine with climate action or lack thereof. We take note that as the world grapples with the climate crisis, corruption poses a huge obstacle and is a silent threat to addressing and redressing the climate crisis. The inadequacy of transparency and accountability mechanisms increases corruption risks in climate finance, as climate funds for mitigation or adaptation may be misused or embezzled. Further, climate corruption also takes the form of undue influence, revolving those between the public and the private sectors, and regulatory capture by the private sector. In most developed countries, undue influence in climate policy undermines climate global progress, while the influence of lobbying presents challenges, which include watering down of regulations, stalling transition to renewables and fossil fuel phasing out, and comprising actions in attaining international climate commitments. In general, the launch of the CPI is also an opportunity to reflect on the global, regional, and country efforts in fighting corruption in order to acknowledge the improvements made and to identify the areas that require urgent collective action. As shown in the earlier presentation, the 2024 CPI reveals that globally, the fight against corruption remains stagnant. Over half of the world's nations continue to score below 50 out of 100, that includes Zambia, indicating a global challenge in combating public sector corruption effectively. At the top of the 2024 CPI, Denmark remains the least corrupt country with a score of 90 out of 100, while South Sudan, Somalia, and Venezuela sit at the bottom as nations that are plagued by weak institutions, restricted freedoms, and deep-rooted corruption perform poorly on the CPI. The Sub-Sahara region continues to be the lowest performing region with an average score of 33 out of 100. Seychelles continues to lead the region on the CPI with a score of 72 over 100, followed by Cape Verde at 62 over 100. In 2024, Botswana and Rwanda are both in third place, scoring 57 out of 100, while Mauritius rounds up the top 5 on the continent with a score of 51 out of 100. The bottom performers in the region are South Sudan, 8 out of 100, and Somalia, 9 out of 100. We are pleased that Zambia's CPI score has improved by 2 points, rising from 31 out of 100 in 2023 to 39 out of 100 in 2024, accompanied by a 6th-place jump in global ranking from 98 to 92 out of the 108 countries on the CPI. This improvement, though modest, reflects progress in specific areas. One of the major drivers of Zambia's CPI improvement in Zambia in 2024 is the reduction of bribery in business operations, facilitated by key government reforms. The digitalization of the mining license application processes, strengthened beneficial ownership requirements in procurement, and the adoption of service charters in public institutions have all contributed to a more transparent business environment. These reforms demonstrate that reducing the human contact in providing government services and enhancing transparent business practices reduces the perception of public sector corruption. However, we would like to caution that this is not a time for complacency, as the rate of improvement has slowed, dropping from a 4-point increase in 2023 to just 2 points in 2024. If immediate corrective action is not taken, we risk stagnating or worse, regressing in 2025. Therefore, despite the modest improvement in our CPI score, significant challenges remain, one of the most concerning of which is the growing perception of corruption within our legal system. TIZ and other stakeholders have continued to raise alarm over recent consent judgments entered into between the state and various individuals. In our view, while some consent judgments are justifiable, Others lack sound legal justification and may serve as their racketeering schemes. For instance, in instances where individuals acted in private capacity, there is no moral or legal basis for the state to offer compensation. Such actions not only undermine the integrity of our legal system, but also erode public trust in our institutions. Corruption within the climate finance poses a growing threat to Zambia's ability to effectively respond to the climate crisis. The lack of transparency in climate-related funds increases the risk of misallocation, regulatory capture, and due influence from private interests. If Zambia is to truly embrace a green and sustainable future, integrity must be at the center of our climate policies and initiatives. There is need for full operationalization of the Access to Information Act. Without clear guidelines and enforcement mechanisms, the media and civil society remain constrained in their ability to hold power to account. Transparency and accountability are the backbone of any successful anti-corruption strategy. And as long as information is not accessible, corruption will continue to thrive in the shadows. Ladies and gentlemen, the fight against corruption is not a battle that can be won by government or any one entity alone. It requires the collective efforts of law enforcement agencies, oversight institutions, the private sector, civil society, and every single Zambian who believes in transparency and accountability in how the country is managed. In light of our findings from the 2024 CPI, we would like to make the following recommendations to the government. Number one, accelerate efforts in combating public sector corruption to ensure continuous improvements in Zambia's CPI score and restore public confidence in governance. Two, finalize the guidelines and rules for the Access to Information Act to promote transparency, accountability, and effective scrutiny by the media and other stakeholders. Three, address the growing perception of corruption within the legal system, particularly concerning court judgments that lack legal justification and may serve as avenues for corruption. Number four, strengthen oversight of climate finance to prevent undue influence and mismanagement of funds meant for environmental sustainability. Zambia's response to the climate crisis must be guided by integrity and accountability at all levels. And lastly, take stronger action following the publication of the Auditor General reports in order to halt the continued trend and abuse of public funds, including the CDF program. Ladies and gentlemen, corruption is not just a political issue. It is public policy and a development issue. It affects our economy, our institutions, our environment, and the very fabric of our society. Granted, we acknowledge the progress made. However, let us not lose of the sight of the work that remains. Zambia has the potential to continue its upward trajectory on the CPI and other corruption and governance indices. But this will only happen if we take decisive and immediate action to address the bottlenecks we face. The choices we make today will determine whether we continue the path of progress or fall into the grips of more endemic corruption and impunity. As I conclude, we as CIZ remain steadfast in our commitment to advocating for transparency, accountability, and good governance. We call all stakeholders, government, civil society, the media, and citizens to join us in this fight. Let us continue working together towards building a corruption-free Zambia anchored on citizens, businesses, and institutions of integrity, where corruption has no place, and where justice, fairness, and integrity reign supreme. I thank you.
Thank you so much, Chapter President, for the CPI leadership and recommendations. I'm sure the questions that were asked online, they have been answered with respect to the recommendations. We now have the report officially uploaded on our website. The cards are still active. On our tables, we have cards. You can just scan the barcode, which is behind, and we are able to access the report. For this particular aspect, we will also, since we are launching, we will definitely have to demonstrate that we have launched it. And at this particular point in time, I will request that this high table, the people on the high table move in front, and also this table plus the TIZ members that are present, so that we can come at least take a photo demonstrating that we have officially launched the 2024 Corruption Perceptions Index. Okay, the cameraman can guide. I'm being informed that maybe we can have others stand on the stage. I'm being informed that the cameramen are requesting that others stand on the stage. Yes, behind. Yeah. Okay. So we can hold the booklet like this. Yeah, so that it's clear that we are not. The official cameraman, please, you can help us. All right. Thank you so much. Yes. We can have our seats and the reports, we can go with them. If it was a wedding, I would have said in Tunguru. But for now, I think we can, a round of applause for the official launch of the 2024 Corruption Perception Index. Once more again, thank you so much. We move to the next stage of our program. Basically, we are almost coming to the end of this program. And as we end, I will invite Mr. Raymond Mutale, who is the head of programs at Transparency International Zambia, to just give us the next steps and the way forward, and also the closing remarks. Mr. Raymond, sir.
Thanks, Chimuka. At this stage, we just want to answer to the question, what's next? And in doing so, maybe let me start by re-emphasizing that because of the wide range of governance aspects that CPI touches on, we continue to treat it as one of the solid sources of evidence to inform institutional, legal, and policy reforms. And therefore, we have plans for this year in terms of how we take forward this conversation on the CPI. In addition to the recommendations given by the chapter president, Transparency International Zambia, we want to share a few interventions that we've put together for this year to continue the conversation arising from the findings from the CPI. There are 5 interventions we are proposing. The first one, obviously, looking at the questions you are asking, this requires continued conversations, and we plan to have bilateral
Corruption Perceptions Index, also known as the CPI, scores and ranks countries around the world based on how corrupt